What if I told you that there's a 4-mana creature that puts a +1/+1 counter on one creature and draws a card each turn? You probably wouldn't be too impressed. And when I was throwing together my Omnath Locus O Fall deck, a deck completely manned out of cards that mention one of the 4 seasons of the word season itself, and came across Leinore Autumn Sovereign, I thought the same thing. That wasn't until I played the deck and noticed just how much work she was doing all on her own. I began to think of how else I could use Leinore. I knew it wouldn't be any bracket 4 or even a bracket 3 deck, but I thought I just might be able to make a solid bracket 2 deck with her. As I began building, I noticed that the deck was surprisingly cheap. Shortly after ditching a few cards that were worth more than the entire rest of the deck combined, thanks to Universes Beyond, I noticed I could very easily get this deck under $50. That's right, a solid bracket 2 custom-made deck for the same price, or at this point half the price, of an official WotC precon. So let me show you what we did. There are a lot of different things that Leinore does, and if I wanted to make a full deck out of her, I knew I needed to capitalize on every single part. The first thing you'll notice on Leinore is Coven. Leinore is great with Coven as she can add some more counters to make sure it's always active, and relies on it being active to draw cards. Some of my favorite Coven cards that I found while making this deck are Contortionist Troop, which also cares about counters and puts another one on a creature each turn, just like my commander. Wall of Mourning, a great blocker with one of the most interesting forms of card advantage in the entire game, usually drawing you 3 cards in a couple of turns. And Redemption Choir, a discounted Sun Titan that's more on theme and works super well for the deck. There are also some similar effects to Coven that work slightly differently. We see these on cards like Selvala Eager Trailblazer, which makes some extra bodies that can help with Coven and makes on minimum 3 to 4 mana each turn. Rip Spawn Hunter, another form of interesting card advantage in the deck with 2 different ways of caring about power. And Collector's Cage, a, shall we say, legally distinct form of Coven that can easily cheat out huge creatures really early. The next thing you'll notice on Leinore is the +1/+1 counter synergies. While she doesn't put a ton of counters on things, it's always the first counter that's the hardest. Some ways of using this counter are on Devoted Druid, who can use the counter to get rid of her -1/-1 counters, getting extra mana each turn. Devoted Druid can also put extra -1/-1 counters on herself to ensure that we always have Coven, even getting negative power if we need her to. Incubation Druid is another great mana engine. It ramps into our commander a turn early, and then makes 3 mana every turn afterwards. And there's also Evolution Witness, who can bring our permanents back from our graveyard every single turn. The last bit of text we can exploit on Leinore is the fact that she's a human. While we aren't specifically a human kindred deck, we can run a few synergies. For instance, we have Heronblade Elite, which cares about our humans and cares about counters, turning each into some extra mana for us to use. There's also Sigarda Champion of Light, which does a ton of useful stuff for the deck. Not only is she a good body on her own, but she also buffs all of our humans, cares about Coven, and gives us some decent card advantage, all in one neat package. And there's also Torsten, Founder of Benalia. To be honest, I just threw this card in the deck because it seemed like a lot of fun, but we're going to hear a little bit more about him later. But just because I made a deck that sounds good on paper doesn't mean that it actually works, so I printed it out and took it to my LGS. This is one of the most solid decks I've ever built. It has enough card advantage to always hit its land drops, enough ramp to always stay in the game, and some interesting cards that work surprisingly well. Here are some of the cards that I was really surprised by. First we have Wall of Mourning, which I was a little bit hesitant about. I thought it wouldn't have enough impact or wouldn't have enough card draw, but it's a fantastic blocker and the card draw is surprisingly good. I would suggest throwing this in almost all of your white commander decks since it's some amazing card advantage in white, which is something that white struggles with outside of certain archetypes. One card that I expected to be pretty good but still surprised me was Evolution Witness. It was a giant value and recursion engine that was very easy to exploit. It generally got back 1 permanent each turn, which is great on its own, but often got back 2 or 3. Next is Redemption Choir, which was just as good as he read. I love Sun Titan, but I'm hesitant about putting it in most of my decks because of the high mana cost. And while Redemption Choir does have the extra requirement with Coven, it was almost always turned on and always felt like a 4 mana Sun Titan. Hidden Nursery always felt like the perfect card. It always felt like we had enough card advantage to hold off on playing it if needed, but it also gave us something to do when we had nothing else. Mercy Killing and Ruinous Intrusion are some of my new favorite removal pieces in the game. Both get around common forms of protection to get rid of a permanent and also give me a ton of value at the same time, both at a pretty good rate. And finally, I put him in just because he looked silly, but Torsten put in some serious work in the deck. With 80 cards either being lands or creatures, he almost always drew 7 cards on ETB, then acted as a big creature that nobody wanted to kill. The last part of this deck I want to give some praise is Force Mage Advocate. I found this little 2-drop from Nyx's Lotus, and it lets us put cards from our opponent's graveyards into their hands and put a +1/+1 counter on any creature at instant speed. This is one of the most fun cards I've ever used in Magic. It messed up my opponent's graveyard synergies, disrupted blocks since we can put the counter on any creature at instant speed, and opened up tons of political plays we can make with our opponents. It led to some of the most interesting and fun interactions I've ever had while playing Commander, and I would love to see this card played more. And that's pretty much the deck. If you'd like to check it out, I'll have the Moxfield link in the description. Check out the considering list for tons of cards I'm thinking about, and as always, I'd love to hear any suggestions in the comments.